Yvadney Davis, and I'm here with the CC Art to talk about my art journey and my work. I've always been the kid that drew, that loved art. I'd hide under the table before nursery to do as much as I could before going, and did art passionately all the way up until A level. But I didn't see how I could possibly have a career as an artist. And I also had a passion for fashion, went to Central St Martin's, did a fashion degree, and that has been my life thereafter. And then the global pandemic happened a few years ago, and I was trying to homeschool my children and make it fun for them. So I gave them an art lesson, and I decided to join in and found that whole process really healing. So started painting again, and found that as I would paint, it was almost meditative. And I would get lost in that moment of mark making on the canvas. I got brave enough to start sharing these works with some of my friends. And then people started asking if I'd sell them. And that seemed kind of crazy to me that anyone would want to buy my work. But I decided to see what happened with that. I then started applying to open calls and exhibitions. And each time I applied for things and exhibited, I'd become more and more confident. The big change for me, where my art developed the kind of meaning and context that it has now, was spending time with my grandmother, who was part of the Windrush generation. She wasn't very well. It was the last few months of her life, being back in her home and hearing her share stories from her younger years, and then leaving her home for the last time and realizing that all those things that I had taken for granted in my childhood would be gone, and they wouldn't really mean anything to my children. And I kind of wanted to make sure that my art practice was almost like a visual archive for what it means to be a Black British Caribbean person in the late 20th century and 21st century. I always grew up with saying back home, and back home being Jamaica or Grenada. But then this also being my home. But then people would say, "Where are you from?" And I'd say, "Oh, I'm from here." And they said, "No, where are you really from?" So I felt like I was from there. And then I remember the first time I went to Jamaica, they called me British. And I was like, I. You know, my aunt taking me to Dunn's River and trying to get local rates and just told me to shut my mouth. Yeah, just don't say anything, and I like look at it like, oh yeah. But I realized that, that for such a long time I was like, well, where am I from? Where is home? And I feel like with my art, I finally landed that home is here, but it's special. Like, and I'm capturing what this part of the Caribbean diaspora means, being here in the UK. So it's very different from my cousins in America, and it's obviously very different from my family back in Jamaica. Every year you get round to Windrush Day, and everyone just goes on about the boat and the people on the boat, and that's it. And there's so much more to Windrush than that. There was a Caribbean and African community here long before Windrush. We've had a presence in this country since like Roman days. However, specifically talking about that time, I find it essential to, when people say go back home, especially nowadays, people are like, go back home and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, no, hang on. Let's understand what that was about. Firstly, we were invited. And also at that time, like you asked my granny, she was born in Jamaica, but she was British. Why were we British? Because we were part of the empire. So we were invited here to rebuild a very broken country and treated absolutely appallingly. And people forget some of these things. Yeah, we've brought jerk chicken and carnival and reggae, but there's so much more to our contribution and so much more to how we were treated. And I think that the way that generation were treated, and their children, particularly I'm thinking of like my mum and her generation, in education, in housing, in all of those things, they inform employment, they informed how they were treated and then their children. So when you talk about the youth today, let's just rewind to how it all started and actually try and like focus on fixing that. So I find that really, really important. We did a series called Proverbs of the Windrush Child, and I interviewed 4 different elders about their experiences coming here as a child. Because again, with the Windrush, we always focus on the boat and the people that chose to come here. But there were a lot of children that were left behind and then were sent for at a later stage. Some of those children didn't even know their real parents. They were raised by grandparents, aunts, uncles, and they became their parents. They were part of a beautiful community. And then they were sent here. And that, I was like, well, maybe that would have an impact on where we are today. And it did. It was actually traumatic for all of them. And yet they survived and they're still here. And I was really glad that I got to share their stories, because bar one, all of them are very like normal, non-famous people. And what that inspired, regardless of Windrush, was a lot of messages from people who were getting their children to interview their grandparents and ask them to tell them about their lives. And I thought that was really beautiful. Spending time with my grandmother in those last few months completely shaped me. I felt like here was a woman who had lived a very simple life, but it had meaning. And I realized that amongst her community and her peers, whatever they ended up doing, whether they were seamstresses, cleaners, worked on the buses, in public transport, whatever it was, it all had meaning. And all of those small moments in those homes, the food, the laughter, the style, like everything about it, even though it was very humble, was very, very meaningful. And so for me, that's why I wanted to take something as distinctive as the wallpaper that I remember seeing in all of those homes. If I could use the pattern carpet as well, I would, but that might be something that happens a time away. But yeah, I felt like our homes now don't have that kind of character. We all look pretty much the same. And yet as I started sharing my work, I would speak to other people, and I realized that, yeah, these memories were not just mine. It was a very communal memory, and it also intersected with other communities. So other working class communities like Irish and also other migrant communities here also had similar experiences of taking what little they had and creating something that was a creative expression in a safe place. For me, if I was to find a signature print for Caribbean British people, it would be 1970s wallpaper. And I've found, as I've been collecting so much wallpaper over the years, that each wallpaper has a distinct personality of its own. And so I love really considering, particularly if it's, like a portrait. For the portraits of the women, for example, I was able to choose wallpapers depending on their personality or how I saw them, and really think about how I combine all of those patterns together. Because in some of those homes, you might have one wall with one wallpaper and another wall with another. And I didn't grow up in I wasn't born in the 70s, but and people often say, well, everyone had this. Yeah, in the 70s, everyone had 70s homes, but I come from a working class background. So quite often, if I was going into these homes in the 90s, they hadn't redecorated. Some of them hadn't redecorated in the noughties either. So yeah, that's what it signified to me. It was that first sight. This is telling me about a moment in time and a certain people. So my creative process is generally like, I'm listening to an old song, I'm watching a TV show or a movie or a documentary, or I'm reading a book on poetry, like something like that, and just a word or a line or something will untap something going on here in my brain, and I'm like, oh, and I know that I have to do that for a piece. I use, if it's not me or friends, I use a website that has the most beautiful stock images by like up and coming Black photographers around the world. And I will find a photograph that I'm really intrigued by. I mean, I do change people's faces a bit to make them a bit sadder, but I no. And then I start mapping out my piece, but also I might go in my sketchbook and do like a rough kind of, I don't know, it's kind of like everything with me is like my gut and super spiritual. So like I'll just sort of draw them and I might give them names or just things come out. So like there's a piece I'm working on now, which is all to do with black love, but like long black love, long relationships. I've been with my husband before since we were young. And so I'm celebrating that journey in them, but like I've given him a name, I've given her a name. There are just random lyrics in there. And somehow that just informs my work. I then start with a layer of underpainting. But traditionally underpainting is very like ochres and gentle. I tend to go for really punchy, bright colors because I use oil paint. Sometimes that comes through, but those punchy colors, I don't know, it just feels better to paint on top of them. It's a much more enjoyable process, and I am very tempted to one day just leave my work as the those at those early stages because they are really, really beautiful. And then yeah, it just starts with the painting in that process. I always start with eyes and mouths because I think they're really important in terms of getting the character. Yeah, and then generally about halfway through, I go through my massive wallpaper collection and start picking out colors that I might want to use, like different roles that I might use. And at some point as well, I would have made traced an outline because I do collage in pretty much all of my pieces, so I have that ready to go at the end. And yeah, that's my process. And I never know when I'm done, but it's generally before I've overworked it. Like I don't mind if things aren't perfect or something's a little bit off. That's okay. Um, and that's a good balance for me because I don't like it feeling too overworked. It just feels very uncomfortable in my gut. And I have so much respect for people who do realism, but it's not my thing. I'm going to talk about my most recent piece of work, which is called Sorrow SE22. It's a piece of work that introduces my beadwork to it. It's a portrait of a young Black woman who is looking in a way that I would say is insolent at the viewer. She is cloaked in a cape that is made of wallpaper. She's very contemporary. All of my figures are contemporary. And in the backdrop, there's some like tropical fauna all around her. But coming from her eyes are tears made of beads. And the beads are very significant for me. I remember going to homes that would have beaded curtains as an entryway to the kitchen. And for me as a child, I would linger in this space. That was like a magical portal. I loved that moment of standing in the beads. It was like a waterfall. I loved the sound they made. I loved the colors, just everything about them. And so I've started making my own beaded curtains that I can introduce into my work. However, beads were also used in the transatlantic slave trade, and they were used as currency to buy and sell my ancestors. So there's this duplicity of joy and sadness in the work. And this particular piece, Sorrow SE22, is part of a broader series I'm working on called Croydon Girls Cry Too. I live in Croydon, and I always see, like on social media, Croydon girls are the butt of every joke in terms of being really rude, bolshy, strong. And I think they're almost how Black women have been seen. And actually, for all the toughness that we've had to do, we've had to be insolent, we've had to be brave and firm it to survive. And actually, Black women want to be damsels. We want to cry. We want to be held. We want to be vulnerable and tender. And this particular piece is showing that. I've called it SE22, so that's the postcode of my grandparents. And I only discovered like recently just how sad so many elements of my grandmother's life were. And I think for her, that showed out in different ways that weren't healthy. There was bitterness. There was just, she was quite introverted and she tried to hold everything together. And I believe, and that's the whole point of this whole piece, that she just needed to cry. And it's very representative of her generation, that they felt that the best way to cope with life is to not let anyone know that they were sad. So that particular piece, someone described it that it's in an exhibition and someone said it reminded them of the Mona Lisa. And I was obviously very flattered, but I think that they were probably talking about the face and the expression on her face. She is looking like she could call you names. But also she looks really sad, and I'm really proud of being able to just capture that very thin line, and I'm excited to keep doing more of those. When people see my work, particularly those from the Caribbean diaspora and the Caribbean community here, you generally get a, oh yeah. And I did the piece behind me with the carpet protector. I was really nervous about showing that. So I'm like, this is the strangest thing I've ever done. Like, will anyone get why I'm putting carpet protector over this black man? And yet I spent almost an hour talking about carpet protector with people recollecting their memories of creeping home, trying not to make a noise on the carpet protector, like all of those things. And I often hear people say, I feel really emotional and I'm thinking of some really lovely memories, and that's a beautiful thing. So yeah, I do feel like it's telling something that's very unique to our experience here, because I can't speak on Jamaica or Grenada. You know, that informs my work. West Africa informs my work, because these are all these threads of being not only part of the Caribbean diaspora but also part of the African diaspora. It all informs my work. But this is where I am. I've landed here in the UK, South London, in the 21st century, and I can only speak from this viewpoint. And I'm realizing that people feel like their invisible story is now visible. They feel seen. Being a mum is incredible, and I wouldn't be doing art if I wasn't a mum. It comes with its challenges in terms of time. And I won a residency this year, and my application included that the reason I was applying and I deserved it is because I needed some time away from my family to fully focus on my art. But also, both of my children are very artistic, which is sad. My husband is an engineer. um, but they're but they're both artistic in different ways. And there's often times when I'm in here painting and I'll just give them some of my art things, and they're creating their own things. We're kind of working in this space together, and I think that's really beautiful. Like, particularly with my daughter, I wouldn't be surprised if she ends up being an artist herself, and that's really exciting to see. Like, she had a funny week with her friends at school, and she could come home and I was like, just paint it out. And so they're learning why being creative is so essential to human thriving. But yeah, it's challenging. I do every year. I do a self-portrait to sort of mark how I'm feeling. And at the end of last year, I did a portrait. It was meant to be about me. It was just going to be me, because I felt like this was going to be a great year, and I was just stepping into it with a fresh start. I had lots of ill health, and it was like, it's time to be me and happy again. And then my daughter, every time I was trying to like get things right, my daughter just kept coming in, mummy, like climbing on me. So I decided to make her part of it. And I really liked that final piece. I called it Inset Day because it was on Inset Day. And that was the piece that got into the National Portrait, the Portrait Prize at the National Portrait Gallery. And, it's incredible. That whole experience has been incredible. And what has been really lovely is all of the messages I've got from parents and teachers saying how much they resonate with that piece. So I don't I'm learning about the art industry a lot more in terms of being an artist mum. I know being a mum in the fashion industry traditionally wasn't considered very cool and people would hide it. But like, thanks to people like Rihanna and Beyonce, yeah.
She literally owns it.
Yeah. And people like Beyonce, you're learning that you can still be relevant and be a mum. Like, of course you can. You don't need to hide it. And actually, it can make you even more expressive, even more edgy, and all of those things. So yeah, I've never hidden the fact that I'm a mum in my art. Some of my earliest pieces were about motherhood, and they will continue to be that way. The biggest challenge that I feel like I've learned to deal with this better is the rejections. A lot of art is applying for things. You're applying for funding and grants. You're applying to be, in open calls and exhibitions. And to begin with, it was hard not to take it really personally. And I've learned in time that, yeah, maybe one of the judges didn't feel that they may have liked my work, but it didn't work with the other art. With the funding, they would have had thousands of other applications, and I wasn't successful this time. And I've learned to just go and go again. And I do believe in that saying that what is for me will never pass. So I've learned to kind of acknowledge that I'm disappointed, but keep it moving. The imposter syndrome is such a messy thing, and it's even more messy now that we've given it a name because we've made it bigger, like we've fed the troll. But for me, the best thing was to put my lenses on and focus on what I'm creating, and there's always a why. So there's a why behind everything, which no one can ever take away from me. It's mine. It's my story to tell. I have the agency to create it. But I find before, when I would compare myself to other artists or think, oh no, I'll never be like them, it's instead of thinking it's a competition, it's just celebrating them. Like, I'm glad there are so many Black British artists. I'm glad that I am connecting with so many other British artists who are talking about the Caribbean experience here. I'm all the more better for it, and I think we all are, that we move as a movement. So yeah, that's how I've overcome it, in seeing it as a possibility rather than a negative. I've stayed really committed to this for a few reasons. Firstly, going back to how I started, because I find the process of painting really therapeutic. It is something that is so magical to me, and I just love seeing and discovering what I can do with paint. I'm a painter's painter. I love it. I love mixing colors and choosing, like, the process of creating my works will never bore me. I hope the day I die, I've got a paintbrush in my hand. I love it. And I feel like I've been given such a great gift in order to do this with my life. I also feel like God has given me this gift for a reason. And I say that because, as I said, this started off as like personal memories that I realize are communal memories. And the community growing up, the Caribbean community here was very united, and I found as I've grown up it's become more and more fractured. And what I found in sharing my art is it's a real coming together that feels very powerful to me. I've been able to share our stories that, yeah, some people might dismiss, but as irrelevant, and I'm showing that the invisibleness of our stories and our lives, the way we have done things here, are actually really powerful. So that's another reason. I also feel so accountable to my children because they've been part of this process, and they're my biggest fans. The very first, people to call me an artist were my children in assembly, saying, "My mummy's an artist." And I'm like, "Oh wow, okay." So they're watching this, and they've seen me go from doing paintings on like a tiny A4 piece of, paper, to having my work all over the tubes, all over the country in a major exhibition. And they're part of this. I'm doing this to create a legacy for them. I'm doing this so that they know that, they matter, and also I suppose that in a couple of 100 years, if people want to know what were the Caribbeans, how did they get here? How did it start? They can look back, and my work might become part of that and inform people that we were here, we mattered, We were sad, we were happy, we created beautiful things, and we are part of the fabric of this country. What will always keep me motivated with this is because I feel like I have a mandate to do this for my life. And it's really important for me to create this visual archive, so to speak, of our existence here. And so I know that I have endless stories in me, endless memories, and I don't know if I'll ever get them all out, but that's what keeps me going. I enjoy the process, I enjoy the finished product, and I enjoy thinking about what I'm going to do next. I'm at this place now in my art journey where I feel really comfortable. Like I feel the imposter, I hate that word, imposter syndrome, but I really do feel like I've battled with that, self-taught. I am hoping to, do further studies with my art, but I feel like everything I'm saying is with full confidence. And I'm really excited about this journey because it is all about my memories, and you'd think that the more memories that come out of my mind, like the less there would be, but I find like as I'm painting something, another memory comes about, another direction comes into the storytelling. Each person that I capture on a canvas is a person to me, and yeah, it's exciting. Like it's endless possibilities, and I'm so excited to tell more stories. I'm hoping over the next couple of years I can have a solo show. That would be amazing. And people always ask me, when are you doing a solo show? I'm like, I don't know. But yeah, but with the solo show, it's not even, like as I'm doing my work now, I'm starting to introduce beadwork into my pieces and more 3D elements, so I can see it feeling like more of an experience, like coming home in that exhibition. So I'm really excited in terms of thinking about that. But for now, it's just I'm in this season of just enjoying creating the work. My biggest piece of advice would be to continue to ask yourself why. Why are you creating the work that you are? What is the meaning behind it? I recently had a conversation with a young artist who'd been told to think about what's selling, what's trendy, and like you can go it, there's that whole question of art and commerce. You can go down that route and try and make as much money as you can for a time. But if you're thinking about something that you're proud of, um, that you're creating as a legacy for yourself, think about what is it that you're doing, and does it have true meaning to you, or yeah, are you trying to emulate what you think other people will want? Because you'll always come to a dead end at that place.